The park that I serve at decided it was time to take some preemptive measures regarding the invasion of murder hornets in the U.S. Clear evidence you don't necessarily become a ranger chief for your intellect, and so it was decided that if we saw murder hornet nests, we would find a way of documenting them by getting as close as possible to take pictures and then reporting them, and then the crew would contact a professional wildlife control team. I would point out that murder hornets have a way of patrolling the perimeter so many yards away from their nest. But what do I know? I'm just an ordinary ranger. So I was making the rounds, making sure everything is alright. This is during the pandemic, so there really wasn't a whole lot of park rangering to be done. But I did notice through the thinning leaves on a hill that a tree had some things suspended from them. They were oddly shaped, so they clearly weren't a natural part of the tree. I suspected that they could be the nests of insects. I hadn't seen anything like them before. Great. I had to call them in as potential murder hornet nests. After all, we were placed in a region that would have to be on high alert for the nest of these insects, and even if they were relatively benign, it was just one of those chances you did not want to take. So I radioed them in. After that, I was instructed to get as close as possible, document the nests, send photos, and then the professional cleaner-uppers would be sent in. It just so happened that the hill the tree sat on was entirely unapproachable. The hillside was thickly overgrown with brambles and stinging plants, and all kinds of other things that were thorny that scratched and nestled stickleburs in my socks. All of a sudden, I was wishing that those objects hanging from the tree were murder hornet nests, just so that my effort would be well worth it. At long last, I reached the top of the hill, and I approached the tree cautiously. When I realized what I was looking at, I think I was more afraid than I would have been if it had been murder hornet nests. Instead of the papery nests of dangerous insects, there were 3 severed heads hanging from the tree limbs by meat hooks. Worse yet, there were large wasps of some kind darting in and out of the ears, eyes, noses, and mouths. The case had been going on for almost 2 months now, and it's most likely a cold case. The only thing more mysterious as to who would do such a thing is the way that those wasps were able to set up a home inside those very heads. It kind of makes me shudder just thinking about it. If there's anything that bothers me in my time on the job of being a ranger, it's the way today's parents are glued to their phones while they're at the playgrounds with their kid. I don't think people realize that all it takes is a couple of seconds for their kids to be gone. If mom or dad aren't eyes up, they may as well not even be there. Their very presence doesn't deter a child abductor, like it did back in my time. Predators are getting more desperate, and child trafficking is even a bigger industry than it used to be, if you can imagine. So children, like cattle, are a very valuable commodity in today's twisted, sick world. One weekend afternoon, while driving around the park, I drove by one of the playgrounds, and there was the weekend crowd of adults with their children. It made my heart sink to see that not one adult was playing with their kid. Every last mom and dad, or whatever, were seated on a bench, glued to a phone, while kids were off doing their own thing. Some of them yelled for mom or dad to watch before they went down a slide or jumped off a ledge, but they were so fully absorbed in their screens. I shook my head, thinking that they're missing the best years of their kids' lives. I parked next to all the other cars for a moment, just to make sure there was no clear and present danger to the kids, since the parents on the premise weren't going to. That's when I heard the tinkling music box music that we associate with an ice cream truck. I looked around to see where it could be coming from, but the road that led off to in the parking spaces where I was, it was completely empty both ways. As if a signal had been given, all the kids on the playground abandoned the play equipment and began to run off in one direction that was across the playground where there were no roads. It dawned on me that was the direction that the music was coming from. Not one, and I mean not one grown-up, lifted their head. I flipped on the siren on my car, trying to get the so-called parents to snap out of it and notice what was happening. They were still staring at their phones. They didn't even bother to look over at me. They didn't look up and look for their kids. For a brief moment, I questioned if I was asleep and dreaming. I got out of my car, ran up to the closest parent that I could see, and I did not hold back from yelling at him, telling him to take care of his kid, for crying out loud. Not only did he remain in the same position, staring at his phone, that's when I noticed he wasn't moving at all. His phone in his hand, he was looking at it. However, his thumb was motionless and the screen was off. He didn't even blink. A cursory inspection of all the other adults revealed that they were in the same condition, in the grip of some sort of paralysis. I had no choice. I ran after the kids. I was inspecting the tree line that they were running towards for any kind of road where an ice cream truck could be driving. But there was no such thing, just the unbroken tree line. The music was coming from the woods, and the kids were running into those woods without any hint of caution. There were at least 11 or 12 kids, and there was no way I would be able to catch them all. But what else was I supposed to do? A few of them were already in the woods, and the extra adrenaline kicked in, and now I was running faster, even though I was already getting winded. I figured, if anything, the best strategy was to follow the music, and then I would find everybody. The music led me straight to, not surprisingly, an ice cream truck. But the way the ice cream truck was nestled in the woods among the trees, I figured it would have been nearly impossible for it to have been driven there. It was almost as if it had been dropped into the middle of the whole thing. As I drew closer to this truck, it looked like it hadn't moved from that spot in an extremely long time. So long that the moss was growing up on the side of it, and wild vines were sneaking up wherever they could get a grip. The music played loud and clear, and the ice cream truck was clearly the source of it. But the interior was very dark. A side door opened on the truck, which led to the interior of a trailer. And without a moment's hesitation, the children began going inside. They didn't even bother to go to the shop front of the truck. They were just heading straight into the trailers through open door. Hadn't their parents taught them anything? I called out to the kids to stop, but of course they didn't listen. I tried grabbing one of the stragglers as she was trying to do her best to keep up. I'm not kidding you. She whipped around and scratched me worse than any scratch I've ever gotten from a cat. Blood was flowing right away. I was frozen in pure shock for only a moment. I tried to run around the remaining kids and put myself between them and the door. And I swear, these kids possessed a strength that I didn't know children could have, and they pushed right past me. I was shoved forcefully from inside the trailer, and the door slammed shut when the last child went through. I radioed out immediately that I had a situation where kids were going into an unidentified vehicle that appeared to be derelict, giving directions to where I was nearly impossible, so I had to give them GPS coordinates and hope that they were accurate enough. Whatever had happened to the parents, it had worn off because everyone back at headquarters was getting visits and phone calls from distraught parents, wondering where their kids were, some of them even threatening violence. I couldn't just stand there and do nothing. I tried kicking in the door to the trailer, but it was a solid sheet of granite. I've never seen anything like it in all my years. The helplessness that I felt in that moment was a feeling that I hope I never feel again. I tried shattering windows, ripping screens, but every single part of that rickety old trailer held fast against me. It was almost supernatural. The door didn't put up as much of a fight when my fellow officers showed up and cut the doorknob off. When they finally got inside, the music stopped immediately, and they found that it was completely empty. The only living things in there were the remnants of all the plants that had wormed their way through the structure of the trailer. The bins of ice cream had not been used in years. A thorough investigation was launched, and I was under a lot of heat for how bizarre my story was. I took a lot of anger from the parents of those kids and all their friends, because in case you hadn't noticed, if you're so much as accused of being a child predator, you are a child predator, no matter the lack of evidence. People will just as soon pick up their torches and their pitchforks, based on hearsay, rather than give you a fair trial. At the very end of a long, painful legal tug-of-war, I handed in my badge and I retired, which did not solve anything for me. I can't describe to you the horrible feeling that shoots through my system when I hear the sound of an ice cream truck's music. I also can't describe to you the vitriolic rage that goes through me when I see parents out with their children in public, and the parents glued to their phone. I don't know what forces were at work that day when their kids got away from their parents, but there is still no excuse for any absent parent, whether that absence is physical or mental.